Good? Okay. All right. Well, we've been talking about solving problems. The first night we looked at the difference between being a people pleaser and, well, getting stuff, fixed. A lot of times Christians just try to be people pleasers rather than actually trying to grow and help others to grow. And then the second week we looked at being offended. The idea of, are you easily offended? Are you constantly offended? Then last week, which was the part 3, we talked about just the dealing with people with differences and how a lot of times we'll go into fights with people just because they're a different person. And a lot of the disagreements that I see actually originate with this problem. Just, wanting other people to be like you. I saw this funny meme on Facebook. Had Buzz Lightyear and Woody, the cowboy. And Buzz has got his hand around Woody, and he's going like this, and he says, "You see, they don't want to hear your opinion. They want to hear their opinion coming from your mouth." And it's kind of like that. So you really have to kind of be careful there. But tonight we're going to look at weighing your own heart, because whenever you go into any kind of a conflict, or if you're trying to just resolve a conflict, or whether it's not even your fault, is you have to know what's in your own heart. I mean, for instance, if you already have decided that this person is wrong, if you are already decided that you're going to side with whoever's older or younger, if you've already decided that you're going to side with this person, you're not really interested in reconciling these two people. You know what I mean? You just kind of want to have it your way, and that's kind of going to be a constant threat. So last week we looked at the idea of the 3 major differences that come between us and others. The first one was differences in character, like, for instance, if I'm kind of shy and if you're outspoken. If I would rather read a book and you would rather go out and go to an amusement park. I mean, these are just character differences. It's not like one's different, one's wrong. It's just that differences. Then the second thing we looked at was differences in preference. So that was more like you're a Republican, I'm a Democrat. You love country music, I love rock music, or something like that. Okay, preferences once again doesn't really have anything to do with are you saved or not. And so then the last thing was difference of morality. That was obviously the only one that should cause a distinguishing factor. And so what is morality? Okay. I believe that you should be over 18 to be involved in a sexual relationship. See what I mean? That would be, to me, an issue of morality. Does that kind of make sense? So I hope that you understand the distinctions there. So let's tonight and next week, and next Sunday night, we're going to be looking at Matthew 18, which anytime you're looking at resolving conflict, you really need to look at Matthew 18. The easiest thing to do is to just talk about the person you don't like. That's the easiest thing to do. The second easiest thing to do is to ask the pastor to take care of it. while you just kind of avoid it and hope that it goes away. So those are the 2 most common things that you see. Very, 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 very common. So Matthew 18:15, we'll just look at this one verse tonight, but then next week we'll look at the rest of the passage. If your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the 2 of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. And that's the end of that we're going to look at. So there's a few things that we're going to look at with this verse. I think we oftentimes just read this part, go and point out their fault, and we just kind of ignore the rest of the verse. That's the part I care about. I just want to tell them what they're doing wrong and how stupid they are. That's the only thing I care about. All the other stuff I don't care about. So okay, let's look at this. First off, there's a few questions that you need to ask when doing this. The first thing, is it a sin or is it something that irritates you? Is it a sin or is it just something that's irritating you? Because just because you're getting irritated doesn't mean that they're wrong. I mean, you could just need to change. I know, right? And if you read the verse, it says, if your brother and sister sins, not if they're irritating you, if they sinned. There's a big difference there. A lot of the times what happens is Sometimes we'll use our authority or our position to try and talk down to somebody and guilt trip them or manipulate them into doing something differently just because it irritates us. You know what I mean? It won't have anything to do with, this person did something wrong. It'll be like, well, I'm the dad, so I'm right, and they're wrong, and they just need to stop that. And it's like, well, maybe you're just, I'm talking to myself here. Maybe you're just being impatient and forgetting that they're 5 and you're 28. So just minor things like that. So is it a sin or is it just an irritant? The next thing, is it something you just need to drop? Sometimes there'll be something that happens and the best course of action is just drop it and move on. And what we want to do instead is we want to just kind of drag it through the mud, and it's like, okay, like I'll give you an example. Somebody does something stupid. They realize that it's stupid. Everybody there realizes what happened. They're just like, okay, well, I'm sorry. And then, they move on, and then you just keep hanging on to it. You know what I mean? Something like that. Where it's like, that they messed up. They know that they messed up. Nobody's surprised here. They instantly regretted it when they did it, and they're like, have you ever been in a thing like that? Where maybe it's you and you did something real stupid and you're like instantly regret it and you're like, I'll never do that again. What's the best course of action? They already know that they're wrong. Should I really drag them through the mud? You see what I mean? No, just drop it. You know what I mean? There's some times when you just need to drop it. Especially if you're in any kind of leadership, there's going to be a lot of times where sometimes you should always, deal with the things you have to deal with. I'm not trying to say anything about that, but there's going to be sometimes when you just don't have to deal with something. It's something that either is resolving itself or you sticking your finger in it will just make it worse. There's some things that it's just, well, I'll come back to that. The next thing, is it against, if you look on Matthew 18:15, it says, go up just between the two of you, if they listen to you, you have won them over. So if your brother or sister sins, okay? That brings us to an idea. Another translation says, if they sin against you, if your brother sins against you. This one didn't. This one's the NIV. I believe it's the NASB that says, if your brother sins against you. So that brings another kind of interesting point. Is it really any of your business? Huh? Is it really any of your business? Is it something that it's your domain? Like, here, I'll give you a couple examples. Correcting somebody else's child. Probably not your place. I mean, there's a few times when it might be, like, for instance, if you are teaching a class and they are one of your students, that's different. But I'm talking about, like, well, I'm just going to march over there and tell that little brat. I'm going to go to Walmart, and if I see them throwing their self on the floor, I'm just going to go over there. And I mean, it's just not going to go that great. And is it something that needs to be addressed, or is it just something that, once again, you just want to get your voice out there? Is it hearsay, or do you actually know that this is what happened? Well, they told me, so I know. I trust them. Well, that's stupid. Anybody's opinion is going to be tainted. And if they're trying to, bring you into this conflict, probably not the greatest thing to just take them at their word. Take them at face value. Well, they said this, and I trust them, so that's just the way it is. It doesn't matter how much you trust the person. Everybody's going to make mistakes. And it just is one of those things where when you just go marching in there like a rhino, and I'm just going to, say, well, maybe you ought to slow down, calm down for a little bit, and just make sure you actually have the facts, or if you even need to know the facts. For instance, if somebody comes to me, griping and complaining about their spouse, I don't really need to know the facts on that one. You get what I'm saying? Like, I don't need to, could you elaborate more? And then go to the other person. Your spouse says that you are a manipulator and just kind of a sorry person. Can you tell me your side of that? You know what I mean? Like, it's just maybe that's not an argument I need to be involved in. Just kind of throwing that out there. So, is it hearsay, or do you actually know? And then, what is your attitude? What is your attitude? There's this rift that always has existed. Different generations have dealt with it in different ways. But I mean, it's still persisted, and that's that young people and old people. It's like it's just doomed to fail, right? I mean, you have the parents who just, complain about their kids all the time, and the kids who complain about their parents. And then you get grandparents involved, and it gets even more confused because, oh my goodness. So then you get it in a church situation where there's, cliques that develop. So there'll be like the older people clique, and then the younger people clique, like a youth group versus, the senior group. And so then there'll be like this mudslinging and stuff, and it just gets to be bad. So some young people just don't like old people. They just can't listen. They just don't want to listen. An older person says something and they just instantly tune it off. Why? For no other reason than that they're older. Well, they're just old and outdated. They have no idea what it's like to live in the world nowadays. Yes, because we ceased existing because we are now over the age of 20, right? Whatever. But then on the other side of that, Ricky just said this, some older people they just find stuff to complain about young people. You know what I mean? They're just looking for something. Like, don't do this. Let me just give you the general rule. Go out and look at how young people are dressing out in the street. When they come to the church, that's how they're going to be dressing. You need to be okay with that now before they get here. Because when they get here, when you start talking to kids about respect and how they need to dress, then I can guarantee you turn them off. They're not going to come back. And at that same point, young people, you need to learn that you don't know everything. You've lived on this earth literally for less than 20 years. I mean, just they've lived as long as you 3 times. Maybe they know something that you don't. Did you ever think of that? One of the stupidest things you can do in life is get to this idea. I know it all. I don't need your help. I don't need your input. And the thing is, that's a problem that young people and old people do. If you're old, sometimes you get to this place of, I don't need the young people. I don't need to change. My way's been good enough for this long. I don't ever need to change. Then if you're older, if you're younger, you do the exact opposite. They don't know. They're outdated. They don't know anything about anything. I don't need their advice or input. I think maybe God had it where we needed each other. That's just my opinion. Whatever. It says in the Bible that Adam lived 900 years? I wonder if they stopped listening to him after 700 years or after 800 years. When did he become old? You're 800 years old, great-grandpa. You don't have nothing to teach me. Anyways, and something that you always have to watch, and I'm not just talking about people with different ages, I'm talking about everything, is make sure that you don't get the idea that that person is the enemy. Young people do it something like this. They're just opposed to change. They just don't want to learn. They just want to do the same stupid thing forever just because they've done it for forever. But then older people do the same thing. It was a good enough way. Why are you trying to change everything? It's the same thing. It's the same attitude. It just comes out in different words. So what happens if we're not careful is we start seeing people as our enemies. See what I mean? These people in the church I don't hang out with because they annoy me. They're not like me. I don't want to change. I don't want to learn. I don't want to listen. This group over here, and everybody has that group, that definition of person that they just aren't real crazy about. Some people are racist, some people are sexist, some people are ageist. Everybody has something, and the thing is, you really have to learn to get over it, because really people aren't your enemy, regardless of how different they are than you, and that's something that has to be dealt with. See, this is kind of what I'm talking about with weighing your heart. Is my heart right to resolve this issue? Before you ever go to resolve an issue, you have to wait and let God weigh your heart. Don't go into it with this attitude, I am 100% right, and I just know. I mean, it's definitely a temptation as a pastor. You side with one person because, you like this person. You really don't like that person. It's okay. You can laugh. Jeez. Just joking with you guys. Anyways. And then another thing that you have to ask yourself, is it something that should be dealt with at this time? I'll give you an example of this. I knew someone, and they lost their spouse to cancer. And so they were saying things that were not theologically true. And do you think it would be a good idea for me to correct them at that moment? It's probably not the best time, huh? They just lost their spouse to cancer. See what I mean? They were going through something called the grieving process. Something that happens is when you go through a grieving process, your beliefs are changed. For good or for worse, they're changed. And you sometimes say things you don't necessarily mean, or maybe you're just struggling with not having the answers to the hard questions of life. And so you say something in the heat of the moment. That doesn't mean that you need to correct them right there, right then. You see what I mean? Maybe just let that one go. Does that kind of make sense? And then another thing I want to look at is this, is it says this, and then they're here. Just between the two of you, if they listen to you, you have won them over. Another translation says, you have won your brother. You have won them over. And that brings us to another important question. What is your purpose? This is actually more important than if you deal with it at all, is what your purpose is in dealing with it. Anytime you say something, you always need to stop and say, what's my purpose of this? Before you go and nitpick and criticize and all these things, just ask yourself this question: what is my purpose? Am I building them up? Am I tearing them down? What kind of a result is this going to have on them? See what I mean? And this is something that you always have to ask yourself. What is my purpose? Too often, we kind of go along the lines of this. I've already made up my mind to believe, so I'm going to go and tell them what I think they need to hear. Why? What is my end game in this process? Imagine if you were playing sports and you had no idea what you were doing. Okay? You're playing baseball. They stick you out there with a bat, and you're just like, what am I doing? So they throw a ball at you, and you're like, I guess I catch it. Maybe I hit it really hard. Oh, a foul. You know what I mean? Okay, well, I hit the ball. Now what do I do? See what I mean? There's no purpose to it. And a lot of times when we're talking to people, when we're nitpicking them, when we're just giving them all the list of things that they're doing that annoys us, there's really no purpose in what we're doing. It's unfruitful. It's unhelpful. It's just criticizing. You just already decided that they're wrong. They need to change. You just have a chip on your shoulder. This person you just don't like. That's something you're going to have to deal with, especially if you want God to use you. So then the last question that you really need to ask yourself, have you been talking about them? Have you been complaining about them to other people? This is probably not the best things. Besides the obvious thing that God, doesn't really look good on that. He kind of is not a big fan of that. And I think that if God's not a big fan of that, you ought to not do it. It erects barriers between you and others, because this is what happens. Somebody mistreats you, you still treat them good, word gets around. Somebody mistreats you, you mistreat them back, word gets around. You do good for someone, they don't pay back, word gets around. It's kind of one of those things. One of those things. And then it shows your heart, too. If you're the kind of person that talks about people and complains about them, it really shows something lacking in your own character. And that's valuable, because if you can spot your lack of character, then this is an opportunity to grow. If you don't even look at yourself, that's probably not the best of things. And then it obviously makes it harder to resolve the conflict if you're talking about the person. I think that kind of goes without saying, though. So the two biggest mistakes that we make with conflicts is, number one, blindly believing what others say. Well, they said this is what happened. They said that this person just wronged them. They were hanging out with this person, and all of a sudden, they just stopped, and they said it was their fault. Well, they said they said that they didn't mean to do that. That must mean they really didn't mean to do that. Come on, son. They used to say I wasn't born yesterday, and I think that somehow we've regressed to where we act sometimes like we were born yesterday. Just because somebody tells you something doesn't mean you have to believe it. Because somebody passionately believes something themselves doesn't mean that you have to believe it too. There is a certain amount of discretion and wisdom that should kind of take place. And then the second biggest mistake we make in conflicts is letting it fester. When you just leave something sitting there nagging at you and you just keep thinking about it, it turns into a sore. And then it affects your attitude, it affects your relationship, it affects others. It's like this. When you're exercising, well, when you're hiking is a good example. And they always tell you to keep your socks dry. Keep your socks dry. One of the most overlooked things when you're hiking, because what happens is you get a boot that doesn't fit right. And then you get water in there, and it gets your sock wet. And then what happens is it rubs on it, and it causes a blister. Now, you don't even notice it the first day. You really don't. You wake up the second day, and you're really in bad shape. And the last thing you want to be is way out in the boons on a hike, backpack. I did this once. I was with this guy, and he, oh, no, I don't need to dry it out. I can tough it up. I'm a man. I was like, okay, whatever, do whatever you want. And sure enough, turned into a blister, turned all big and nasty. He was limping the next day. I was like, I'm not carrying your pack. You wouldn't take off your socks. I mean, I'm already carrying 40 pounds. You want me to carry your 40 pounds too? I don't want to do that. Anyways. And it was something he had to learn how to, he just made it harder on himself. He made it harder on himself. Because he didn't do things right, because he didn't take care of it. And that's kind of what happens here. We blindly believe, and we let it fester. So that takes us to a third thing I want to look at. We looked at the first thing, we looked at these preliminary questions. Is it a sin or is it an irritant? Do you need to drop it? Is it your business? Does it need to be addressed? Is it hearsay? What's your attitude like? Does it need to be talked about at this time? What's your purpose? And have you been talking about them? We looked at the two biggest mistakes, blindly believing and then letting it fester. And then now I want to look at how are you going to face this? When there's something irritating, when there's something that is bothering you, when you are facing that irritant, what are you going to do? And the first thing is to resolve it if you can. Obviously, you're not going to be able to resolve every conflict. But don't do this. Well, I tried, and they're just a pig-nosed moron. So I'm moving on. I don't think you tried that hard. So there is that. And here's how you know. Sometimes you're going to have to move on. This is how you know if you're moving on with the right attitude. No matter how bad they talk about me, I am ready to fix this when they are ready to listen to me. I've tried to say sorry, they wouldn't listen. I've tried to work out the issue, they wouldn't listen. They're talking bad about me to others, I already forgive them. They don't need to say sorry. When they come around, I'm waiting to reconcile my relationship with them. I'm waiting for it. Versus, I hope they never talk to me again. See the difference? Complete difference in attitude. So, okay. So resolve it if you can. Don't be one of those people who beat something into the ground for 30 years. Learn when it's time to move on. That takes us to the Serenity Prayer, which I think is just great, and I had to cut it off because it's actually a very long prayer. People don't know the whole thing, but it's 3 sections. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. We could stop right there and have a lot of valuable lessons to learn. The courage to change the things that I can instead of wallowing in it, right? And the wisdom to know the difference between the two. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace. There's some valuable stuff in that prayer. And I think that any time that you're looking at resolving a conflict, you ought to have something in the lines of this where you're willing to change, you're willing to go through it, you're not in the mindset of I'm just giving up on somebody. You hear a lot of people talking about divorce. What is a much bigger danger than simply getting a divorce is having the attitude of divorce. I'm writing you off. I don't want anything to do with you. I'm going to be mad and bitter towards you. See what I mean? That's something we don't just do with this person that we're a spouse that we divorced from. That's something we do with people too. And the attitude of divorce is I'm not trying to say that divorce is whatever. I'm trying to say the attitude behind that where we just are not wanting to learn how to love somebody. That's something that infects the church. It infects the church all around the world. This is something that always has to be dealt with. So anyways, okay. So resolve it if you can. Get space. Sometimes we try and we're irritated about something, and we just try to keep going at it, day after day after day. Do you know what happens when you are training for something like climbing? Here, good example. I was biking to Mescalero yesterday, it was yesterday. And I got about halfway there, and I was like, okay, I'm done. And so what did I do? Well, I went home, and it was awesome because it was all downhill. And the entire way to Mescalero is uphill. Even the part that looks like it's flat is not. Man, oh man, that's difficult. I thought I was going to have a little bit of time to catch my breath. Wrong. The only time I got to catch my breath was when I was going downhill, but then I couldn't catch my breath because I had to hit the brakes and slow down a little bit. Anyways, but the point being here, learn sometimes you just need to get space from the problem. Take a step back. The other day Micah did something that I was pretty upset about. So I told him, Daddy's a little bit upset. Just stay right there. And I went out of the room because I was really mad. So what are you going to do? You're going to yell and scream at your kid. You're going to beat them. You're going to start throwing away their stuff. What are you going to do? Or you could just go and calm down for a second. Sometimes timeouts are for you, not them. But anyways, it's the same principle, though, that applies not just to parenting, to life in general. Sometimes just take a step back. When you get space from a problem, sometimes you realize it's not as big of a deal as you thought it was. Sometimes it just gives you that chance to catch your breath so you can face this problem head on. See what I mean? If you're trying to fight it when you're already out of breath, probably not the greatest of times. So resolve it if you can. Get space, not for too long, but sometimes you need to get space. Clear your head. You can do this through a means of ways. Exercising is notoriously good for clearing your head because you have to focus with your head on your exercise. Another thing that will help with this is fast. Because when you go without food, man, oh man, the first day your body is like, I'm going to die. You're trying to kill me. Call the police. You're trying to kill me. And, that'll get your mind off the problem. Maybe sometimes what you need to do, for instance, is eat a snack, take a nap. Sometimes we think that naps are only for kids, but I tell you what, sometimes when you're dealing with something that's so frustrating, when you take a nap, you wake up and you're like, it's okay, it's all right, it's fine. I mean, especially in the times that we're living in now. I mean, being in leadership, it's problem after problem after problem because some people are scared, some people are mad, some people are, this and that and the other thing, and it's just sometimes you just have to clear your head for a second because you're kind of piled up. Take it to God. You can do this through prayer, praying to Him. Prayer is a good way to experience God. It really is a good way to experience God. Sing songs to God. Read the Bible. The Bible is a great way to get to know God. Accept that you are not in control. You are not in control. You cannot control somebody else. You cannot control the situation. You're not in control. See, some of us are just control freaks. We can't stand the idea of something happening that's not fair or not the way we want it. So we just kind of keep running at it, hoping that someday we'll get control over the issue, and it causes us a lot of problems, and it's just, you're not in control. Treat them the way you want to be treated. This is called the golden rule in the Bible. I don't think Jesus ever called it the golden rule. It just says it under the thing, in the Bible. Before the paragraph, it says the golden rule. You're like, what's the golden rule? And then Jesus says this, treat people how you want to be treated. And you're like, oh, okay, now I know what the golden rule is. So give as much grace. Now, this is hard. Give as much grace as God gave you. What I noticed a lot, going back to, I use the example of the older people, so I'm just going to go ahead and stick with it. A lot of times what happens is after we've been alive so long, we kind of forget what a mess we were when we were kids. And so then we expect for the teenagers to act how we act at 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. When we were that age, we were doing a lot worse than they are. See what I mean? And we want to somehow impute our, 30 years of righteousness onto them so that they will be as good as us. And I think that a lot of times we just need to take a step back and remember, oh, yeah, when I was that old, man, I was a mess. I was a mess. And hey, if you got kids, that's a good lesson to learn now. So give grace and give as much grace as God gave you. Learn to deal with the irritation. Sometimes we just learn how to avoid things. And then sometimes we don't balance our irritation very well, so it just adds up and becomes overly stressful. And then it just builds up and builds up till we just kind of snap at everybody. So learn how to deal with it. Learn to not take it personally. Sometimes people will say things, and you can't take it personally. I'll give you an example. I was trying to help someone who I could see was kind of getting back into drugs, and they were still trying to lie to me and say that they weren't getting back. Surprise, surprise, people don't want to admit when they have problems. That's kind of a human problem. So, I was trying to kind of, without coming across as judgmental, I was trying to kind of, bring them back before they got too far. And they had some very unpleasant things to say and to call me. And that's a good example of not taking it personally. Why do you not take it personally? Well, for a lot of reasons. First off, because the things that they said about me showed me what they were struggling with in their heart. Second off, the things that they notice the most about other people are usually the things that they have a problem with. If you hear somebody talking about rebelling against authority, they probably have a problem with authority. If you hear somebody talking about somebody being super prideful and arrogant, they probably have a problem with pride. See how that kind of works? We notice in others the things that are worse than ourselves, or things that we've dealt with for a long time. I was talking to somebody, and we were talking about the way that, who liars bother the most? Liars. I had a relative who used to nitpick all the time. I mean, they probably do, but I haven't seen them in like 20 years, so it's fine. But they used to, well, I guess it's 15 years. And they used to nitpick about everything. And so we went on this mission trip, and man, she was going on and on and on. I mean, the whole time she was complaining about everything. This thing I couldn't understand is half the team were teenagers, and everything the teenagers did annoyed her. So she was always nitpicking the teenagers, telling them what they needed to do. I mean, they're on a mission trip, for goodness sakes. They went to go tell people about Jesus. Maybe back off and like stop treating them like they're villains here. But anyways, she's going at it. So one time I'm in the car, we're all in the van together, and she starts going off on this rant in front of everybody, saying all this stuff. And I was like, oh, okay. I moved on. Didn't take it personally, moved on. And she got out of the van, and everybody was like, huh. And then this other teenager that she'd been giving a hard time turned to me, and she said, you handled that very well. And I was like, I know. Why? Because I learned I don't have to take it personally. Just because somebody says or does something I don't like doesn't mean I have to take it personally. Oh, well. Learn to let it go. And then the last thing here, don't ever invite other people into your offense. If you've got a problem with somebody, if you've got a problem going on, that's your problem. That's not everybody else's problem. During the midst of this, we were talking about how people have just gotten bored with COVID being in their house all day, and they're just coming up with things to be offended about. And I see it all the time. People posting on Facebook these long rants about people, and I'm just like, don't you have a job? And then I remember, oh no, you don't. And because everything's shut down. And it's like. Yeah, I tell you what I've done is I've actually stopped getting on Facebook for the most part. It doesn't help you get connected with people anymore. It kind of just helps you separate from people. If the person actually has gotten into sin, there are typically 3 stages that you need to be aware of. The first stage is a fight against conscience. Their conscience, not your conscience. A fight against their conscience. Now, I'm talking about just beyond regular struggles. Everybody's going to have struggles. Nobody's perfect. But when you're getting into a sin, you're going to have this fight against your own conscience where you maybe can't sleep as well at night, or you just kind of, you're still living on the spiritual high of where you used to be, but because you're going somewhere that you know is wrong, that high is what's carrying you and sustaining you. You're not actually having encounters with God. And so you still give off the illusion of being holy and righteous while kind of just being rotten inside. It's kind of like when you open a really good-looking fruit, and inside is like this black streak with like worms and stuff, and you're like, oh, no way. It's kind of like that. Okay, so they're fighting against their conscience. And here's the thing: when somebody is fighting their own conscience, obviously try and help them. Try and be a voice of reason. All those things. I'm not trying to tell you have to just abandon them, but ultimately they have to make the choice themselves. Ultimately, they have to make the choice themselves, and this is hard because we're all a little bit of a control freak. All of us are a little bit of a control freak. So, the second stage is they try to justify themselves to others, obviously. And this gets hard because you have to show love and forgiveness without encouraging the sin. And what we do is we do one or the other. Either we don't show love and forgiveness, or we encourage the sin. Oh, just worry about you, honey. You can't encourage the sin. So then what we do is, because we like the person, they can't possibly be wrong. So we try and excuse their behavior, right? Well, you just don't know what they've gone through. So it somehow makes their evil okay. So then the third stage that happens, and remember, these are stages that are common to everybody. So if you're getting into sin, you'll find yourself getting into a similar pattern. The third stage is to live boldly. And here's the thing: when you start living boldly in a sin, is you start trying to make disciples. You start trying to recruit people to follow your out-of-control living. And the hard thing about that is you have to learn how to live in the mistreatment. Because at this stage, they're going to become very vengeful about anybody who tried to stop them at stage 1. Do you kind of get that? And so you have to kind of just learn to turn the other cheek and endure it. And that's something that's difficult. And what's even harder is that oftentimes at this stage, because of our own feelings of betrayal, we will actually start mistreating them. So then how they mistreat us will be justified because we've been mistreating them. So it gets to be just a vicious cycle. And just one more point before we close this out. When you are trying to counsel or help someone, always be aware of a thing called transference. Transference. What that means is that when you are counseling somebody or helping somebody, their attitude will start to rub off on you. Their problem will start to rub off on you. Now, I'm not saying hide yourself from the world. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I'm just saying beware, because you'll get sucked in. If you're helping somebody who has a attitude problem, you're going to have that same attitude problem before too long. If you're helping and counseling somebody who is just mean and nasty and bitter, you're going to start losing your temper more often. I mean, Proverbs even talks about this. If you hang around a short-tempered person, you'll learn their ways. It's kind of the same thing. So, okay. I think we've beat that into the ground. I think it's good enough. Let's kind of close this sucker out. When you go to somebody and have this kind of a mindset, I need to set them straight. Remember this, that with the same measure you judge, you will be judged. So you go ahead and march over there and set them straight, and remember that God is watching. And to the same measure that you judge them, remember that. See, what we like to do is we like to forget where we came from and where we are. We think somehow because we are saved by God's grace, we are more deserving of God's grace. Nope. But I've been saved for 20 years. You're still not any more worthy of God's grace. God's grace isn't something that you earn. If you become the best version of yourself, all by yourself, you're still not worthy of God's grace. Let that sink in. So maybe when you deal with someone else, give them a little bit of leeway, maybe a little bit of patience. You can't make decisions for others, but you can offer help or advice. You can give encouragement. You can be available. You can pray. Just be careful of this, going in. Well, what I think you ought to. Now, what was there? There was a cartoon. No, it was They were with the twins. There was a Disney movie. I'm not saying a word, not a single word. And then she goes and says her 2 cents. What was that? Parent Trap. That's what it was. Oh man, oh man. Don't set up traps for them, waiting for them to fail. Well, they better be perfect. Baiting a conversation, saying things that you know will get a rise out of them, just waiting for them to mess up so you can say, ha ha ha. bringing them around people who will criticize them and make them feel stupid. Stuff like that. Come on. And then give them a chance to change. Now, I do want to add an addendum to that. So give them a chance to change, even if it takes longer than you'd like. Just like your kids, right? When your kids mess up and they're stubborn about something, do you just give up on them? No. No. You call them stupid and then you give up on them. I'm just kidding. But they have to discover for themselves. They have to learn for themselves. It's a process. What we like to do is we like to try and prevent other people from having to grow the hard way. But growing the hard way is really the best way we learn. I was talking to somebody, and they said that when you get a ticket in a place, you'll always remember it every time you go by that place. Well, I think that was Joe. Joe, was that you? Yeah, it was Joe. And it's kind of the exact same way. When you learn something for yourself, rather than somebody just teaching you, it sticks with you. You know what I mean? You can tell people how to live, or you can show them how to love. So just the addendum that I wanted to do on that, give them a chance. Be careful. There's a lot of times people will say that they are a Christian, but then they'll just go around making as big a mess as they humanly possibly can. And I just want to reference back to what I said a couple weeks ago. Trust is earned. Trust is earned. Just because you like somebody doesn't mean you have to trust them. Okay, love people, but don't trust them blindly. Trust has to be earned. And, with that being said, remember that you have to forgive every time. Peter really thought he was saying something great when he said, when somebody sins against me, forgive them 7 times, huh? And Jesus says, 70 times 7. And Peter goes, no, really? And Jesus says, yeah, really, dog? And he's like, oh, man. So, just a good example of that. So definitely be careful and remember that you have to love always. You can't love people so that they'll change. You have to love people even if they don't change. You have to love them how they are. Remember that. Just because they don't turn into a mini you doesn't mean that you can't love them. So next week we'll finish up this series talking about solving problems. We'll look at the rest of Matthew 18. And okay, I think we're done there. Pastor started a new series on Sunday.